Hi, Amos here with an update to my Campfire Audio Solaris review. I realised I'd forgotten a pair of IEMs. That is the HiFiMan RE2000s. Now, you can actually, these are the price without the gold plating. In other words, the silver version is $1,500. But I just had a look on Amazon, and now, of course, note the date of this video if you're looking in the future. They are $7.99 direct from HiFiMan. And this is a $2,000 pair of IEMs, well, at least this pair was. So I thought this is probably a worthy pair to put up against the Solaris. And I've also got the Atlas in here. A lot of people ask me for more information on how the Atlas compares to the Solaris. Well, they could easily say, you know, Solaris is better. Well, yeah, technically it is. But there are some things that the Atlas can still do well. So what I'm going to do is I'll take you through some of my favorite tracks that I have from a number of playlists, and try and cover some of the interesting differences between how they play back on these three different IEMs. Now, the RE2000s are probably worth a bit of a revisit. They're a single dynamic driver pair of IEMs. They have I suppose you could say a very, maybe I think what people call a U shape. That is a very deep low bass and very peaky treble. And I've got on them a final Type 5 tips, but if you use, they're very extremely tip sensitive. And so the stock tips or narrow bore tips seem to be really good with these, but everything else that isn't narrow bore tends to just sound completely wrong. And so they're a little bit more, I think they're a little bit more limited in how they perform. So now the Atlas we reviewed, they have a V shape, kind of vocals are pushed back, but they have thundering bass like the Vegas before them, a really extremely entertaining bass. And this can be a good and a bad thing. Good in that it can be, if you don't know if you're not a bass head, you will be after listening with these with the right music. Or to a degree, it's very easy to make someone a bass head because of just how good and how entertaining it is. The bad thing is if you have very heavy bass songs, heavy mid bass songs, these can sound too overwhelming. But to a degree, you can pop off the tips and put on something like spiral dots or something wider bore. I have the spiral dots on the Solaris just at this moment, and then it'll increase the treble. It won't reduce the bass too much, but it'll balance things up a little bit more. But it won't bring forward the vocals. So it was interesting. Now the RE2000s, I'm going to start with something a little bit different, and I forgot to mention classical music. Now, these are, if you're just a pure classical listener, these are excellent. They will, the timpani drums on big orchestral works will just be, the rumble is just fantastic. The flutes and piccolos and the high pitched sound, the violins just come through. That you hear the real detail, like you're sitting in a real concert hall, where the concert halls are designed and acoustically shaped to channel all that sound directly towards you. And these do a really fantastic job at reproducing that. The problem with that peaky highs on these is it doesn't work with a lot of other music. But with classical, and I'm thinking maybe classical, anything recorded in a large hall in general, which doesn't have to be classical, these work really, really well. Now, interesting thing about classical is that if you use the Atlas, you think, well, that thundering bass is going to sound completely wrong on classical. No, actually it doesn't. It becomes the opposite. Because there isn't, the heavy thundering bass in classical music, you get the better quality of the dynamic drivers out of these, and that the high sounds come through really, really well. Now, the interesting thing is the kind of Solaris in the middle. The Solaris doesn't have, depending on the tip selection, obviously, the bass is really excellent, but the treble it's more sort of an upper mid, focus, which works well with small, live recorded music in smaller venues. So this is where these work really well. Now, they do work really, really well with classical because they can, depending of course on tip selection, can bring out the highs, but they don't bring out the highs so much as the RE2000s do to make classical really special. Although this isn't one of those things where comparisons are evil. If I didn't have all these, I'd say these are really good with classical. They're not, but these, in sacrificing kind of an all-rounder ability, the RE2000s do an even better job. And so with large format classical, the Atlas can actually do really, really well because you're not engaging all that bass so strongly. But the Solaris still do, again, a pretty good job. But these seem to, as I said, small venue music works best. Now, so to go through some more modern music, stuff I tend to like tends to be, say, maybe more The more mixed music is, the more, like, in other words, the more that it's recorded in separate tracks and then mixed together, depending on the stuff mixed for regular headphones, tends to fare poorer with IEMs that are designed, for more live recordings, like the RE2000 and the Solaris. So here's some things with just very, very, very random stuff, but some of you may have heard me mention before, some not. So let's start with Paul Simon, and this is a track "She Moves On" as the and this, if you actually listen, Paul Simon is actually pretty well recorded and does have some deep bass in there. Now, the problem is there's also a lot of mid bass, and the Atlas is just too much bass. The mid range is good. I mean, it's not so forward as you get, say, with Solaris or other IEMs. The RE2000 is still a fair way back, but the bass is just too overwhelming with these, and this is where probably you maybe have to experiment maybe more with tips. You could maybe do a better job than I do. Now, the next is the RE2000s. They have the best balance, but there are some aspects where that high peaky treble, which works really well with classical, tends to bring out some annoying sibilance out of the track. Now, the Solaris doesn't have quite such a peaky treble. Well, of course it can, depending on tip selection to some degree, but the tip selection mainly affects the bass of the Solaris. There's slightly less bass and treble compared to the RE2000s. They're very much more U-shaped. Warmer sounding vocals, actually, which is kind of surprising. I probably said that, which is shows just how U-shaped these are. And this kind of focuses on that really the treble, so you get that kind of really delicate sound. This is kind of a slightly more meaty sound than the RE2000, which again just shows how very U-shaped these are. And then of course you have too much warmth from the Atlas. Another track is "Lost on the River" from the New Basement tapes. They produced, the whole album has like about a few different versions of it. "Lost on the River" version number 20, which has female vocals on there. Now the Solaris was started again because that's where when I switched, that's what I had in my ears. Slight sibilance comes through there, but kind of more intimate sound. And this is of course recorded in a smaller venue, so that works out really well. Now, the Atlas has more distant vocals, is the main thing I noted about that compared to the Solaris. And again, that's that focus on the kind of the live venue presentation. And the RE2000s, well, I forgot to listen. But anyway, next one is going to be "Harlem Nocturne" by Danny Gatton, which you may not have heard of, and I hadn't heard of until recently, so I heard it on streaming radio. And that is, the Atlas is where I started with, again, deep bass. That comes through. This is one of those tracks where you want to know what a bass head feels. Listen to this track through the Atlas. It is amazing how good the rumble comes through with the Atlas. Unbelievable. And it was kind of hard to, you just want to come back to it and just have that fun with these. Absolutely amazing. This is where it just really hits the spot. The Solaris brings the guitars in the track more forward. And, the deep bass rumble is kind of lower, but it's still there. It doesn't bring forward. Afterwards, you kind of, if you haven't heard the Atlas, the deep bass rumble, you say, oh, that's really, really nice. It's when you know the fun you can have with these things, that's when why you know people like them. That's where it really hits the spot. But all the same, I mean, if I didn't compare, the Solaris would be really, really nice because it does the really good deep bass that you get with a dynamic driver. Now, the RE2000s, this is one where the RE2000s don't do so well. Too V-shaped, too sibilant and splashy, and it seems too thin after listening to the other two. So again, that's comparisons reveal. It just seems a bit too thin. It's like one person felt that the Solaris was too thin for Fleetwood Mac, whereas it's kind of understandable. Fleetwood Mac probably needs more meaty sound. And I didn't know Fleetwood Mac this time, but all the same. Lan Me La. I don't know if I pronounced that correctly, and just sorry if I didn't. Delgrez? It's spelled Delgrez, so apologies if I don't know how to pronounce it. I'm just hopeless with these names. HE2K, Go the Drums. And, when percussion comes out, and again, this is the thing going back to where they're really good at classical, really, really nice percussion out of the RE2000s. But, the vocals are kind of very, very far back in this. So you're sitting, you very, very far back. It gives you the big sense of space. The Atlas, in the turn, comes warmer and thicker sounding. So you've got that, thicker upper bass, lower mids coming through. It's probably just the main takeaway. Otherwise, there's nothing particularly other notable, better or worse than this. Again, it's a comparison thing which you might like in that particular track. The Solaris is more balanced. it doesn't have quite the fun bass of the Atlas in this track. Once you get used to the thumping in these, it can be hard to kind of, you notice it when you switch IEMs. But if you didn't compare, you'd still enjoy the Solaris. It doesn't have the airy treble of the RE2000s. Again, if you compare, you thought of go, oh, I wish I had more air in the treble, and these don't sound so good after you compare. But the thing is, it's not so strong in the treble or bass that either of those come through in a way that's annoying. It's more balanced. And again, you can put spiral dots on there which balance things up a little bit more if the bass is too much. And some stuff, the bass is too much or not enough. There's some Soundgarden where the Solaris didn't have enough bass and sounded too thin, whereas, the Atlas probably is better for that. The RE2000s, again, work really, really well with classical, and I listen to Yo-Yo Ma, and then there's another album which I recommend, which is called Orchestral Fireworks, as A.G. Owe. I'll put all this stuff in the description. It's just all like standard fare, very thundering orchestral works, Bolero is, being one of them, obviously. And it's really good. It's got a ridiculous. Some of the tracks have got ridiculous dynamic range, like a dynamic range. All of them have got tracks of dynamic range over 20. I think if you, except for one really long track, they're all like 2 to 4 minutes. They're not really long tracks. But I think if you eliminate the one really long track on there, the whole album ends up with a dynamic range of 24 or 29 or something like really insane dynamic range. So it's kind of a really fun thing. One of those albums that you prank, hi-fi stores with, and they start putting on Bolero, and it starts really quiet at the beginning of the track, and by the end of the track, it's like thundering the whole place down. It's just that much dynamic range. But that's where these RE2000s really excel. If you don't compare, these are pretty good all-rounders, and they don't fall apart on much. Whereas the Atlas, if you want to know what really good bass head IEMs on the right music, but can be overwhelming. So kind of too thin, too thick, somewhere in the middle. And that's probably the kind of overall summary. Big venue, medium venue, kind of, thunder. That's probably the base summary of that. So that's those 3 IEMs. I haven't gone into any other fine details. The other thing to note is about the Solaris is that they're very sensitive to output impedance. Even going from 0 to 2 ohms makes a difference in the bass. These are the RE2000s are 60 ohms and are like headphones. You can power them. Think of them like a pair of headphones when you're powering them, is good to note. And the Atlas, well, they're dynamic drivers and they're fairly flexible in how you power them as well. So I used all of this out of a Hugo 2 and a IFI Pro IDSD and a couple of other things, but essentially out of the high-end gear. And so I hope that was all useful. And if any questions, comments, and constructive criticism are always welcome. It's good to know. I've got some good ideas from people in the comments in all sorts of regards in that way. And also, thank you once again to my patrons. Those people make these videos possible to happen. Do check out the links in the description. I will tell you how you can support me. If you're equivalent to buying me a coffee once in a while, or some people buy me a bit more than just a coffee once in a while, you can support making these videos go ahead. And thanks once again for watching, and I'll see you online.